Elara was 10 years old when they cast her out. She was not an orphan then, but she would be by sunset. Her crime was simple. She told a truth no one wished to hear. She had stood before the town council, a slip of a girl with dirt under her nails and her mother's wild herbs in her hair, and she had spoken of the fever. She spoke of the grey vein rot on the river reeds. She spoke of the silence of the frogs. She spoke of the sweet, sick smell that clung to the water in the evenings, a smell her mother had taught her to fear. Her mother, a woman of root and leaf, lay dying in their cabin even as Elara spoke, her skin turning the colour of wet slate. The men on the council had listened with stony patience. Mayor Thornton, a man whose belly strained the buttons of his waistcoat, had patted her head. He had called her a girl of vivid imagination. Dr. Hemlock, whose spectacles always seemed to catch the light in a way that hid his eyes, declared it was grief sickness. He said the child was addled by her mother's decline. They gave her a biscuit and sent her away. That night, her mother died. The next day, the fever took 2 more. By the end of the week, it had claimed a dozen. The town did not see a prophet in the girl who had warned them. They saw a curse. They whispered that she was a fever witch, that she and her strange mother had called the sickness down upon them with their digging and their weeds. They burned the cabin, with her mother's body still inside. They gave Elara a mule, a sack of flour, and a compass. They pointed her toward the formidable spine of the Stone Fang Mountains and told her not to return. Exiled at 10 for telling tales. The tales, however, had been true. 20 years passed. The town of Prosperity forgot the fever, as towns are wont to do. They buried their dead and their memories with equal efficiency. They grew. A new sawmill whined by the river. A railway line was rumoured. Mr. Silas Croft, a man who built his fortune on timber and land, was erecting a grand new aqueduct to bring water directly into the town square. It was a marvel of cypress wood and modern engineering. Prosperity was proud, and in a high, hidden valley, miles up the stony shoulder of the mountains, Elara remembered. She was no longer a girl. She was a woman, carved from solitude and granite. Her hands were calloused, her face browned by a sun that shone far from judging eyes. Her only companion was a grey packhorse named Shale, a creature as silent and steady as she was. She possessed 2 things of value. The first was her mother's journal, saved from the fire by a moment of frantic courage. Its leather cover was scorched, its pages brittle, but the ink within held the sum of a forgotten wisdom. It held the knowledge of leaf, root, and bloom. The second was her project. Her folly, the town would have called it, had they known. For 20 years, Elara had been cultivating a garden. This was no simple patch of kitchen herbs. It was an undertaking of immense scale and singular purpose. She had found a bowl-shaped valley, protected from the worst of the winds and blessed with a pure spring that trickled from the highest rocks. For 5 years, she had done nothing but clear the stone. She and Shale hauled thousands of pounds of rock, building retaining walls that terraced the valley floor into wide, sweeping levels. For 3 years after that, she had amended the soil. She composted, she mulched, she hauled tons of rich loam from lower elevations, mixing it with sand from the spring's basin until the earth was dark, fragrant, and alive. Then she had begun to plant. Yarrow, with its feathery leaves. Willow, which she kept pruned into manageable shrubs for its bark. Fields of echinacea, their purple cones turning to face the sun. Great, sprawling bushes of elder, heavy with flower and berry in their season. She grew dozens of other plants, each with a purpose detailed in her mother's script. Each was a word in a language the town of Prosperity had willfully unlearned. This was her life's work, a medicine garden, a living apology to the mother she could not save, a silent, growing prophecy against the ignorance she could never forget. In the spring of 1888, the year of the great drought, Elara descended from the mountain. She did not go into the town itself. She went to the office of Mayor Thornton in the new brick town hall. He was older, his belly now a proud declaration of his status. He did not recognize the gaunt, sun-weathered woman who stood before him. "I am Elara," she said. Her voice was rough from disuse. Recognition dawned, followed by a wary discomfort. "The fever witch's girl," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "The river is sick," Elara stated, ignoring the title. "The water runs low. The reeds are wrong. The heat of the summer will bake the sickness into the mud." "The town is fine, woman. We have progress now. Mr. Croft's new aqueduct brings clean water to every home." He gestured proudly out the window. "Wood rots," Elara said. "It holds the damp. It breathes. You are piping the river's illness directly into your kitchens." The mayor's face hardened. His brief moment of pity vanished, replaced by the familiar armor of civic pride. "We have a doctor, Dr. Hemlock, a fine man, educated back east. We don't need the superstitious ramblings of a mountain hermit." "He had his chance 20 years ago," Elara said, her voice flat. "His education failed then. It will fail again." "That is enough," the mayor snapped, rising to his feet. "Prosperity is a modern town. We have engineering, we have medicine. We do not have time for wild tales from a woman who talks to plants. Good day." Elara looked at him. She saw the same willful deafness she had seen 2 decades before. She turned and left without another word. Her visit, however, did not go unnoticed. The story spread through Prosperity like a grass fire. The mad mountain woman had returned. Elara the Mad, they called her again. The fever witch. Her warning about the aqueduct became a town joke. Mr. Silas Croft, a man whose hands were soft and whose ledger was full, laughed the loudest. "My cypress is the finest in the county," he boomed in the saloon. "Treated and sealed. It will outlast us all. That woman's mind is as warped as a green board in the sun." Dr. Hemlock, now grey and stooped but no less arrogant, offered his professional opinion. "The isolation has clearly induced a state of paranoia. She has projected her family's unfortunate history onto a public work, a classic case of hysteria." He polished his spectacles. "I assure you, our sanitation is excellent. The only pestilence is in her mind." The story of her hidden garden, gleaned from a hunter who had stumbled upon it, became the punchline. Elara's folly, they christened it, the weed patch. To do something foolish and obsessive, a pointless, back-breaking task, became known as planting a weed patch. The mockery was a comfortable, unifying blanket for the town. It insulated them from the quiet, nagging memory of the last fever. It protected them from the truth that Elara carried in her bones. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens when the fever arrives. Elara returned to her valley. The scorn of the town was a distant echo, a language she no longer needed to understand. She had work to do. Her mother's journal was her guide, her Bible, her commander. It was filled not just with drawings of plants, but with schedules, formulas, and precise instructions. The work was brutal and methodical. Summer was the season of harvest, a race against time and decay. She rose before the sun, the mountain air cold and sharp in her lungs. With shale laden with wicker baskets, she would move through the terraces. She harvested willow bark in long, careful strips, taking only what the plant could spare. She knew the precise age of the branches that yielded the most potent salicin. She gathered yarrow flowers by the armful, their spicy scent clinging to her clothes. She knew to harvest them at midday, when their essential oils were at their peak. She spent weeks picking elderflowers, tiny starbursts of white, laying them carefully on massive linen sheets in her drying shed. The drying shed was a marvel of her own design. A long, low building of fieldstone and pine, with a sod roof that kept it cool. Its walls were lined with racks of mesh screens, allowing air to circulate freely. A system of adjustable vents let her control the humidity with obsessive precision. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was left to chance. The journal specified the exact degree of dryness for each leaf, each root, each flower. Too much moisture meant rot. Too little meant the potency was lost. But the true heart of her folly lay underground. Dug into the north-facing side of the valley was a stone root cellar. The door was a massive slab of oak, reinforced with iron. Inside, the air was cold and still, smelling of damp earth and alcohol. This was her laboratory, her apothecary. Hundreds of glass jars and earthenware crocks lined shelves carved directly from the stone walls. Each was meticulously labelled in a neat, cramped script. This was where the tinctures were made. She chopped echinacea root, the pieces white and starchy, and packed them into 10-gallon crocks. She poured high-proof grain alcohol over them, a costly supply she traded for with the occasional trapper, bartering with expertly tanned hides. The journal dictated the process of maceration. The crocks had to be sealed and stored in total darkness. They had to be shaken once per day for exactly 28 days, to align with the lunar cycle her mother had believed in. She prepared percolation tinctures for the more delicate herbs, a faster but more intensive process. She built a series of conical glass funnels, packing them with herbs and slowly dripping the alcohol through, capturing every potent drop. She calculated dosages. She recorded yields. She tested potency with a grim, scientific focus. Tons of raw plant matter were reduced to gallons of dark, concentrated liquid. Each jar was a promise. Each bottle was a weapon. Shale watched her, his quiet presence her only witness. He would stand for hours at the mouth of the cellar, his ears twitching, as if he understood the gravity of her work. He was her confidant, her beast of burden, her silent family. This was her solitary labor. The town of Prosperity celebrated their progress. Elara prepared for its consequences. If you're enjoying this story, hit that hype button right now. It's free, takes a second, and helps this video reach more people. July burned into August. The heat was relentless. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, empty of clouds. The river that fed Prosperity shrank, leaving wide banks of cracked, stinking mud. Elara began to see the signs. They were exactly as her mother's journal described. A fine, grey-green algae, like a dusting of mould, appeared along the edges of the town's water supply. The journal called it widow's hair. The birdsong grew frantic, then fell silent. The deer moved higher up the mountain than she had ever seen them before, their eyes wide with a primal fear. One evening, a metallic scent drifted up from the lowlands, a smell like hot iron and decay. Elara knew. The time for planting and growing was over. The time for preparation was at its end. She worked with a calm, focused urgency. She brought the last of the dried herbs down from the shed, packing them into airtight tins. Yarrow for fever, elderflower for sweats, peppermint for nausea. She filtered and bottled the last of the tinctures. She organized the cellar, arranging her remedies not by plant, but by symptom. A section for fevers, a section for coughs, a section for pain. It was a system designed for crisis, for a time when clear thought would be a luxury. She brought extra stores of grain and dried meat into her small cabin. She filled every barrel with pure water from her spring. She considered for a moment going down again. She imagined standing before Mayor Thornton one last time, her hands full of proof. But the memory of his condescending smile stopped her. The echo of the town's laughter was still sharp in her ears. They had been given their warning. They had chosen pride instead. A warning unheeded is just a tale. Her duty was not to the willfully deaf. Her duty was to the knowledge her mother had died for. She sealed the cellar door and went inside her cabin. She barred the door and sat by her small hearth, listening to the profound and terrible silence of the mountain. On August 12, 1888, the first case was reported. A child in a house near the new aqueduct's main outlet. Dr. Hemlock diagnosed it as summer flu. He prescribed bed rest and castor oil. The child was dead in 2 days. Then his parents fell ill. The sickness was swift and cruel. It began with a raging fever that did not break, a thirst that could not be quenched. Then came the cough, a deep, racking thing that brought up blood. In the final stages, a crimson rash, like a map of broken veins, would spread across the skin. They called it the crimson fever. It moved through Prosperity like a vengeful ghost. And it travelled through water. Mr. Croft's proud cypress aqueduct, his monument to modernity, had become a vessel of death. The low water levels and the stagnant heat had turned the porous wood into a perfect breeding ground for the pestilence. Every tap in every home delivered a clear, cool, tasteless poison. The town's systems failed. Dr. Hemlock's medicines from back east were useless. His quinine and calomel did nothing to slow the disease. He sent an urgent telegram for more supplies, but the neighbouring towns, hearing of the plague, refused to let the trains stop. Prosperity was quarantined. The proud, proper buildings became prisons. The sawmill fell silent. The stores were shuttered. The economy, the very pulse of the town, flatlined. Fear was a more potent contagion than the fever itself. Neighbours eyed each other with suspicion. Doors were barred against friends. The healthy hoarded food, leaving the sick to starve. The social structure of Prosperity dissolved into a state of primal terror. If Clim has become part of your week, consider joining the channel membership. Hit that hype button if you haven't already. High above the dying town, in her protected valley, Elara was safe. Her world was one of serene, insulated comfort. The air was clean. The water from her spring was pure. The sound of the town's suffering, the tolling of the death bell, was too distant to hear. She ate her simple meals. She tended to shale. She read her mother's journal, not for instruction anymore, but for communion. She was not waiting for them. She was simply living. The sanctuary she had built was for the knowledge it contained, not for the people who had scorned it. But the desperate have long memories. The first arrival came at the end of August. He was a young man, barely 20, his face a mask of terror and exhaustion. He did not walk into her valley. He fell into it, collapsing at the edge of her lowest terrace. Elara found him there. She recognized him. He was the son of a man who had thrown stones at her the day she was exiled. His name was Thomas, and his daughter, a girl of 4, was dying. "Please," he rasped, his voice broken. They say you know things. The old ways. My wife is gone. My little Sarah. Her skin is on fire." Elara looked at his desperate, pleading face. She saw no mockery there now, no pride, only the universal, soul-stripping agony of a parent watching their child fade. She said nothing. She helped him to his feet and led him to her cabin. She gave him water from the spring. Then she unbarred the cellar door. She returned with 3 small, corked bottles. "The dark one is from willow bark," she said, her voice even. "For the fever. 3 drops in water every 4 hours. No more. The clear one is yarrow and elderflower. It will make her sweat. That is good. Do not be afraid of the sweat. It is the fever breaking. The red one is from the purple cone flower, for the strength of her blood. 1 drop twice a day." She pressed the bottles into his trembling hands. He fumbled in his pocket. "I have money." "Your money is worthless here," Elara said. "Go." He stared at her, his eyes filled with a stunned gratitude that was deeper than any apology. He turned and stumbled back the way he came, a man carrying the last hope in the world in 3 small glass bottles. Elara did not gloat. She did not demand thanks. She had acted not out of forgiveness, but out of duty to the medicine itself. The knowledge existed to be used, not hoarded as a tool for revenge. Word of Thomas's daughter spread. The girl's fever had broken. The crimson rash was fading. She was alive. And so they began to come. At first it was a trickle, a desperate mother, a husband carrying his wife. They came humbled, ashamed, their faces etched with the memories of their own scorn. Elara became a silent physician to the town that had exiled her. Her valley was not a refuge. It was a dispensary. She would listen to their descriptions of the sickness. She would nod, then retreat into her cellar, emerging with the prescribed remedies. She began to organize. She taught the healthy few, like Thomas, how to administer the doses, how to recognize the stages of the illness. She turned her supplicants into her assistants. She worked without rest, her movements economical and precise. She, who had lived in solitude for 2 decades, was now the axis around which the town's survival turned. She was not their friend. She was not their savior. She was their only remaining system that worked. The procession of the humbled continued. One day, they brought Dr. Hemlock on the litter. The man of science was shivering uncontrollably, his skin pale and clammy. The crimson rash was already blooming on his neck. His spectacles were gone, and without them, his eyes were naked and terrified. He tried to speak, but only a dry cough came out. Elara looked down at him. She felt nothing. Not pity, not triumph. Just a profound sense of irony. She gave his bearers the same remedies she gave everyone else and sent them away. The climax came a week later. 2 men walked into her valley. They were not sick. They were broken. Mayor Thornton and Mr. Silas Croft. The mayor's fine clothes were stained and rumpled. Mr. Croft's soft hands were blistered from digging graves. They stopped before her, their heads bowed. "Woman," Mayor Thornton began, his voice thick with shame. The town is dying. Half of us are gone. The rest are sick or starving. We have come not for ourselves. We have come to beg." "Your aqueduct is poison," Elara said, her voice as hard and clean as the mountain spring. "I know,"
Mr. Croft whispered. I see it in my sleep. Every plank, every nail. I built a coffin for them all. We have come to ask you, the mayor continued, to tell us what to do, how to stop it, how to survive. We are fools.
We have been proud, arrogant fools. Elara looked past them, up toward the stone peaks that had been her silent companions for 20 years. She had her victory. It was as bitter and absolute as the tinctures in her cellar. First, she said, her voice carrying across the quiet valley, you will burn the aqueduct. Every piece of it. By October, the fever had broken. The first frost came, and the sickness seemed to wither in the cold, clean air. Elara's remedies had not cured everyone, but they had saved hundreds. They had given the town a chance to endure. Prosperity was a shadow of itself. It was a town of widows and orphans, a place hollowed out by plague and grief. But it was alive. In the first week of November, a town meeting was held. It was not in the town hall. It was in the open square, as if the buildings themselves could no longer be trusted. The survivors gathered, their faces thin and weary. Elara was there. She stood at the edge of the crowd, silent and apart, with Shale standing patiently behind her. Mayor Thornton, Mr. Croft, and a recovered, deeply humbled Dr. Hemlock walked to the center of the square. It was the reckoning. Mayor Thornton spoke first, his voice cracking. We were proud, he said to the assembled townspeople. We believed in our own progress. We believed in wood and iron and the plans of men. We stopped listening to the world around us. We silenced the voices that spoke truths we did not want to hear. He turned and looked directly at Elara. 20 years ago, we punished a child for her wisdom. This summer, we mocked a woman for her foresight. We are guilty of pride, of ignorance, of a deafness of the soul. He took a deep breath, and his next words were a confession that hung in the cold air. She was right. We were wrong. Mr. Croft stepped forward. My creation, my aqueduct, it was my vanity. I built it to be praised. It became a monument to my own foolishness. I am sorry. It is a pitifully small word for the damage I have done. Then Dr. Hemlock, his hands trembling, removed his spectacles. I put my faith in bottles with printed labels and theories from books. I dismissed the knowledge that grew from our own soil. I called it superstition. I was the superstitious one, believing my education made me infallible. She saved my life. Her peasant poultices saved me. The apology was total. It was public. It was absolute. The square was silent. All eyes turned to Elara. She stepped forward. Her expression was unreadable. She did not offer absolution. She did not speak of forgiveness. She offered instruction. Your pride did not poison the water, she said, her voice clear and strong. The conditions did. Pride only prevented you from seeing it. Survival is not about blame. It is about listening. It is about remembering. You will rebuild, she continued. You will dig new wells, high up, lined with fieldstone, filtered with sand and charcoal. I will show you how. You will learn which plants to watch. You will learn the signs. You will teach your children. You will never forget again. It was a command, not a suggestion. And the town, humbled and broken, listened. The transformation of prosperity began. They dismantled the remains of the aqueduct,
burning the tainted cypress wood in great pyres that cleansed the air. Under Elara's direction, they built the new water system. It was not grand or impressive. It was simple, practical, and safe. The derogatory phrase, planting a weed patch, was reborn. It came to mean an act of great wisdom and foresight, a preparation made against a disaster no one else could see. The young people of the town, those who had survived, did not apprentice with the carpenter or the blacksmith. They made the journey to Elara's valley.
She taught them. She showed them how to identify the herbs, how to harvest them, how to prepare the remedies. She passed on the knowledge from her mother's journal. Her folly became their university. Elara lived for 50 more years. She never moved back to the town. She never married or had children of her own. Her solitude was too deeply ingrained. She remained in her valley, a quiet, revered sage, the guardian of prosperity's health and its memory. She died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 80, her work complete. They buried her on the highest terrace of her garden, among the yarrow and the echinacea, as she had requested. The garden was declared a public trust, maintained by the descendants of the students she had taught. At the entrance, they placed a simple, unadorned granite stone. The inscription was carved deep. Elara. She listened when we would not. She remembered what we forgot. Her vindication was not found in the apology or in the town's reverence. It was in the quiet, steady continuation of the work. It was in the generations that followed, who knew the names of the herbs, who watched the river, and who understood that the greatest folly of all was to believe oneself immune to the truths of the world. Her legacy was the survival of a town that had once thrown her away. And that was a justice more profound than any revenge.